A new report has found that Hong Kong is better at attracting and retaining talent than Singapore. As CBRE Research says, that's even as both hubs launch new visa programs to attract top-tier workers. And while there's a high proportion of science and tech workers here in Singapore, expatriates could be deterred by the low number of places at international schools. The costs of relocating to Singapore have also increased. Residential rental rates jumped 44% since 2019. Now, on the flip side, Hong Kong's residential rates have fallen since 2019. In fact, CBRE expects Singapore's residential rents to overtake the rates seen in Hong Kong's decentralized districts. But more firms, they are also looking to invest in offices here in Singapore rather than Hong Kong. The earlier reopening of Singapore's economy gave investors more confidence to set up base here. Both business hubs, they are, though, planning new developments to decentralize business activity. Hong Kong is expected to have more office space available for firms looking at lower-cost alternatives. Now, CBRE says that this makes the Pearl of the Orient more attractive than the Lion City.
For the risk-averse investors, Singapore will be one of the safe haven for them to invest. However, if you are looking for opportunistic type of return, Hong Kong is getting more attractive. Since 2020 till now, the office capital value has dropped by 25%. So from a pricing per square foot point of view, Hong Kong is getting cheaper, apologizing for that. And so therefore, people are thinking about Hong Kong is getting very attractive going forward.
Now, for a deeper look, we speak to an expert from a global consultancy. Nydia Niao is Managing Director of Bauer Group Asia.
All right, Ms. Niao, let's pick up from a report that let's be very clear. Your consultancy did not write this. So CBRE, right. It says, and Dawn mentioned, she opened with the line, Hong Kong is better at attracting and retaining talent than Singapore. So first off, would you agree with that? If you agree with that, why? If you do not agree with that, why?
Well, I think the report points out how Hong Kong has a deeper pool of financial talent, but Singapore's talent pool is a bit more different because it looks specifically, we have a wider pool of science and technology workers, but both pools of talents are forecasted to deepen in the long run. And, as the report also, or as you mentioned, Dawn, both markets have actually launched visa programs to attract new greater talent. And, Singapore has introduced the One Pass, and Hong Kong has introduced the Top Talent Pass, which saw, 14,000 applicants apply, within 2 months of its launch. And 95% of approvals were actually given to mainland Chinese applicants. So, I think in that regard, we are looking at two very different situations or different pools that what Singapore is looking to attract might be a bit different from what Hong Kong is looking to attract.
So it's too simplistic to say one is better than the other. It depends on what you want and what you're doing to get there.
Right. I would also just add on to say that, I think while Singapore is still looking to get foreign talent, you'll see, I think, in the next couple months, moves to suggest that Singapore is really becoming a bit more selective when it comes to their foreign talent pool. First of all, you'll see that the introduction of the Compass framework with the point system meant to make things a bit more transparent also means that, they would be a bit more selective about who they can bring in, although it would be made clearer to companies how that would come about. And it's interesting to note that, when you look at both markets trying to be financial services hubs in Asia, that, in the shortage occupation list within the Compass framework, it only has one listed financial services occupation, whereas it has 13 ICT roles that would qualify for more points for companies for their EP applicants.
Right. So even though Singapore and Hong Kong may be targeting, different pools of foreign talent, there may be some crossover as well. And you mentioned the financial sector. That's certainly one of them. So, is there a case for, despite the fact that both have reached out with these visa programs, helping people to settle and so on, helping people find schools for their children and so on. Is there some sort of area in which Hong Kong, based upon the findings of this CBRE report, that it may be, quote unquote, as Wes was saying, better?
Well, I think, I would say that, Singapore is definitely not helping its case. For instance, you see just earlier this week, the announcement of the new additional buyer stamp duties rates is going to make property a lot more expensive for foreigners. And, with a lack of rental housing and growing demand, you see that the gaps between rental prices in Singapore and Hong Kong are definitely going to be further narrowed down.
Right.
That being said, I think with Hong Kong too, there are certain elements that are going to be against its favor. So while it is looking to have it's looking to position itself as a digital economy hub, a financial hub with green finance and things like that, there are still other elements that might cause it to lose, its luster, so to say. For instance, its close ties, with mainland. Is that really a positive thing, or could it be to its disadvantage? Its implementation of Beijing's national security law, the impact on the legal system, what would that really all entail? There are definitely certain disadvantages that we cannot ignore too. And I think, amid US-China tensions, there are definitely companies that are looking to Singapore as a more viable and neutral alternative to set up compared to Hong Kong, which is just situated, conveniently at China's doorstep.
You mentioned, for example, recent moves on our real estate market that might make it more expensive for expatriates to come and rent homes here. And that is one of the reasons brought up in this report. Costs of relocating to Singapore have also increased, residential rental rates jumping 44% since 2019. But the government makes moves like that because it has other policy priorities as well. So when it has to reach a decision on how to bring in foreign people and yet good foreign workers, but also balance other policy priorities, what kind of balance are we looking at? And for you, what are the most difficult compromises that must be made to achieve the best result, given that there will always be limitations?
I think when we look at Singapore, I think it would be particularly difficult, especially in the coming months, because there are general elections in the pipeline. And when elections are that close, issues like jobs and housing are always going to be hot button issues that when I guess the government looks, or I should say the ruling party looks at it, it would want to always make the decision of what would provide it better votes, or what would help in terms of creating its narrative that it is doing as best as it can to, help support Singaporeans. And I think just given the way the 2020 elections played out, and given the moves that the government has taken with regards to the introduction of ABSD to cool the property markets, and also some of the comments that it had made in Parliament, you'll see that I think the ruling party is really starting to form its narrative in terms of ensuring that it is doing all it can for Singaporeans. And I think that, that is a very, very delicate balance that governments will need to tread in terms of making sure that it's taking care of its constituents, for one, but also making sure that top talent continues to want to be moving to the country to help create and grow the ecosystems, especially when we look to having Singapore wanting to be a hub, not just for the finance sector, but for the tech sector and for R&D as well.
Right. The priority being that, that these measures, the cooling measures that we've seen, many rounds of them over the years, the priority being that housing is affordable for Singaporeans, for people who are living here, so they can actually live in their homes.
Right, absolutely.
Right. Thank you very much, Ms. Niao, for coming in and talking to us this evening, breaking down this research that we've seen from CBRE. Nyao, the MD at Bauer Group Asia.